Oh, I see you still don't understand the problem.
In a prestigious university classroom, a mathematics professor stood before her students and made a careless joke, one that would shatter her reputation forever. "Solve this equation and I'll marry you," she laughed, her eyes scanning the room with condescending confidence. The equation on the board had stumped graduate students for weeks, but what she didn't expect was the quiet man in the back corner, the janitor in a worn gray uniform, to step forward with a piece of chalk in his trembling hand. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire academic world and exposed a truth about racism that everyone had been too comfortable to confront. The question is, when brilliance wears the wrong skin color, will we even recognize it?
Marcus Thompson had been invisible for 7 years. Every morning at 5 a.m., he arrived at Westbrook University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. He pushed his janitorial cart through marble hallways lined with portraits of distinguished professors, all white, all celebrated, all immortalized. He cleaned their classrooms, emptied their trash bins, and polished the floors where their students walked with privileged confidence. But Marcus was more than a janitor. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the building was empty and the only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights, Marcus would stop in front of the blackboards. Complex equations left behind by professors would stare back at him. Differential equations, theoretical physics problems, advanced calculus. And while the world slept, Marcus would solve them. Every single one. He never erased his work. He'd write his solutions in the corner of the board, in small, humble handwriting, before wiping them away moments later. It was his secret ritual, his private conversation with a world that had never invited him in. Marcus had grown up in the South Side, where dreams like attending university felt as distant as the stars. His father worked 3 jobs. His mother cleaned houses, including, ironically, the homes of professors. Education was survival, not luxury. But Marcus had a gift. Numbers spoke to him in languages others couldn't hear. While his classmates struggled with basic algebra, Marcus was teaching himself quantum mechanics from library books. He'd applied to Westbrook University 17 years ago with a perfect entrance exam score. He never received a response. No rejection letter, no explanation, just silence. The kind of silence that tells you exactly where you stand. So Marcus became a janitor at the very institution that had rejected him. Some called it irony. He called it resilience. The mathematics department was his favorite place to clean. He'd listen to lectures from a hallway while mopping, absorbing theories and formulas like a sponge. Professor Elizabeth Hartwell was the department head, a celebrated mathematician with 3 published books and a reputation for brilliance. She was also known for something else, her biting sarcasm and thinly veiled contempt for anyone she deemed intellectually inferior. Marcus had observed her for years, the way she humiliated students who struggled, the way she dismissed janitors and cafeteria workers as if they were furniture, the way her eyes would glide past him like he was invisible, even when he was cleaning her classroom while she lectured. But there was something else Marcus noticed. Professor Hartwell had been stuck on a particular problem for 3 weeks, a complex equation in nonlinear dynamics that she'd written on the board during a graduate seminar. Marcus had watched her frustration grow. She'd stare at it during her office hours, tapping her marker against the board, her confident facade cracking slightly. Marcus had solved it the first night. He'd written the solution in his notebook at home, checked it 7 different ways, and felt a familiar ache in his chest, the ache of knowing something beautiful that no one would ever see, the ache of brilliance buried beneath a uniform and skin color that made him invisible. On this particular morning, something felt different. The air in the building was charged with tension. It was the day of the annual departmental challenge, a tradition where Professor Hartwell would present an unsolvable equation to her students and the faculty. It was her moment to shine, to remind everyone why she was the brightest mind in the building. As Marcus cleaned the hallway, he heard laughter echoing from the classroom. Professor Hartwell's voice rang out with theatrical confidence. "Solve this equation and I'll marry you." More laughter. The kind of laughter that comes easy when you're on top, when you've never had to prove your worth to a world that doubts you simply because of how you look. Marcus paused outside the door with his mop in hand and glanced through the small window. The equation on the board was impossibly complex, a masterpiece of mathematical chaos. Students stared at it with blank expressions. Even the teaching assistants looked defeated. But Marcus saw something else. He saw the solution, clear as daylight, floating in his mind like a familiar song.
The classroom was packed. Graduate students, faculty members, even the dean had gathered for Professor Hartwell's annual showcase. This wasn't just an academic exercise. It was theater, and Professor Hartwell was the star. She stood before the whiteboard with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never been doubted. The equation she'd written was a beast, a nonlinear partial differential equation with boundary conditions that seemed to contradict each other. It sprawled across the board in intimidating complexity. "This, ladies and gentlemen," she announced, gesturing with theatrical flair, "is what separates true mathematical minds from mere mortals. I've spent the better part of a month working on this problem. Some of my colleagues at MIT have looked at it. Even Dr. Patterson at Stanford couldn't crack it." She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. "So here's my challenge. And I'm quite serious." She smiled, a sharp, predatory smile. "Anyone who can solve this equation today, right here, right now, will have proven themselves worthy of joining the pantheon of mathematical greats. Solve this equation," she paused dramatically, "and I'll marry you." The room erupted in nervous laughter. It was meant as a joke, of course, a way of saying the problem was impossibly difficult. The subtext was clear. You are not smart enough. None of you are. Students exchanged glances. A few brave souls approached the board, picked up markers, stared at the equation, then backed away. The minutes ticked by. The silence grew heavy with failure. Professor Hartwell's smile widened. This was her moment. Marcus had been cleaning the back corner of the room, methodically emptying trash cans, wiping down desks. He was invisible, as always. A black man in a janitor's uniform might as well have been wallpaper. No one noticed him. No one ever did. But Marcus was watching. And as he looked at the equation, his mind was already 20 steps ahead, seeing patterns and solutions that danced through the mathematical chaos like light through a prism. He shouldn't say anything, he knew that. Speaking up would only invite ridicule. He'd seen what happened to people who stepped out of their place. He'd lived it. But something in him, maybe it was the years of silence, maybe it was the weight of invisible brilliance, maybe it was simply the principle of truth, made him step forward. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly. No one heard him. "Excuse me," he repeated slightly louder. A few students turned. Professor Hartwell was in the middle of explaining why the equation was unsolvable when she noticed the interruption. Her eyes landed on Marcus with visible irritation. "Yes," she said coldly. "Can we help you with something?" The way she said "we" made it clear Marcus was not part of that collective. "I think I can solve it," Marcus said simply. The room went silent. Then came the laughter, not the nervous laughter from before, but something crueler, mocking, disbelieving. Professor Hartwell's expression shifted from irritation to amused condescension. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The equation on the board," Marcus replied, his voice steady, despite his pounding heart. "I can solve it." More laughter. One student actually snorted. Professor Hartwell's smile was razor thin. "You're the janitor, correct?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. The title was meant to put him in his place. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Thompson." "Marcus." She said his name like it was foreign to her tongue. "This is a graduate-level mathematical physics problem that has stumped some of the brightest minds in the field. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you should focus on your actual job." The words hung in the air like a slap. Several students laughed again, some uncomfortably, others with genuine cruelty. The dean shifted in his seat, suddenly interested. A few faculty members exchanged glances. "I understand," Marcus said quietly, "but I've been studying mathematics for most of my life. I know I can solve this." Professor Hartwell's expression hardened. She wasn't amused anymore. She was annoyed. A janitor was disrupting her moment, her showcase of intellectual superiority. Worse, he was a black janitor, the kind of person who, in her worldview, existed to clean up after great minds, not to possess one. "Studying mathematics," she repeated, slowly, mockingly. "Where exactly did you study? Online videos? Community college?" The contempt in her voice was palpable. "Books mostly, library books, and yes, online lectures. I applied here 17 years ago, but you didn't get in," she finished for him, her smile returning. "And now you work here as a janitor. That should tell you something about your mathematical abilities, don't you think?" The room was silent now. The laughter had stopped. What was happening was crossing a line, and everyone could feel it. Marcus stood there with his hands at his sides, his janitor's uniform suddenly feeling like a prison uniform. He could walk away. He should walk away. That's what the world expected. But then he thought about every equation he'd solved in secret, every solution he'd written and erased, every brilliant thought he'd buried because the world had decided his skin color determined his ceiling. "With respect, Professor," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength, "my abilities aren't determined by whether I got accepted to your university. They're determined by whether I can solve problems, and I can solve this one." Professor Hartwell's face hardened. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she considered beneath her. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you're so confident, come up here. Solve it. And remember, I made a promise. Solve this equation, and I'll marry you." The way she said it made the entire proposal sound absurd, grotesque even. The implication was clear. A person like you could never solve this. A person like you could never be worthy of someone like me. The room watched as Marcus walked to the front. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands trembled as he picked up a marker. The whiteboard stretched before him like a battlefield. Behind him he could feel dozens of eyes, some curious, most skeptical, a few openly hostile. Professor Hartwell stood to the side with her arms crossed, watching him like a scientist observing a failed experiment. Marcus looked at the equation, and then he began to write. His handwriting was steady, his movements precise. He started by identifying the boundary conditions, then applied a transformation that simplified the nonlinear terms. Within minutes, patterns emerged. The chaos began to organize itself under his marker. The room's energy shifted. The whispers stopped. Professor Hartwell's smug expression faltered. Marcus wrote faster now, his years of hidden study pouring onto the board. Lemmas, theorems, substitutions, each step building on the last like a mathematical symphony. The equation that had seemed impossible began to bend to his will. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, and then Marcus stepped back. The solution was complete.
The silence in the room was absolute. Professor Hartwell stood frozen, her eyes scanning the board with an expression that shifted from disbelief to horror to something like panic. The solution was perfect, not just correct, elegant, beautiful, the kind of mathematical proof that would be published in journals, studied by graduate students, cited for years. And it had been written by a janitor. This is, she stammered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. This is impossible. It's correct, said Dr. Patterson, a visiting professor from MIT who had been sitting in the back. He approached the board, his eyes wide with genuine amazement. My God, it's not just correct, it's brilliant. The transformation method here, he pointed to Marcus's work. I've never seen this approach. Where did you learn this? Marcus stood silently, marker still in his hand, unsure of what to say. He'd spent 7 years invisible. Now every eye in the room was on him. Professor Hartwell's face had gone pale. The racist assumption she'd made that a black janitor couldn't possibly possess real intelligence had just exploded in front of her entire department. Worse, she'd done it publicly, mockingly, with witnesses. I don't believe this, she said, her voice shaking. Someone must have helped him. This is a trick. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Even in the face of undeniable proof, she couldn't accept that Marcus had solved what she couldn't. A trick, said Dr. Patterson, his voice sharp. Elizabeth, we all watched him solve this in real time. There's no trick here. This is legitimate mathematical genius. He probably saw it somewhere, copied it from a textbook, or... There is no textbook, interrupted Dr. Chen, another faculty member. This is original work. Elizabeth, you said yourself this problem was unsolvable by conventional methods. What we're looking at here is innovation. Marcus felt something break inside him, not break apart, but break open. 7 years of silence, 7 years of hiding his gifts, 7 years of being treated as invisible. It all came pouring out. I didn't copy anything, Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying an edge now. I've been solving equations on these boards for 7 years, late at night when no one's here. I solve them, and then I erase them because... He paused, the weight of it crushing him. Because I knew no one would believe a janitor could do it. The dean stood up, his expression grave. Mr. Thompson, are you saying you've been solving advanced mathematics in this building for 7 years and no one knew? Yes, sir. Why didn't you say anything? Marcus looked directly at Professor Hartwell, then back at the dean. Because I applied to this university 17 years ago with a perfect entrance exam score, and I never even received a rejection letter. Because when I tried to audit a class once, I was escorted out by security. Because every day for 7 years I've been invisible to every person in this building. Not because I wasn't smart enough, because I was wearing the wrong uniform and the wrong skin color. The words fell like stones. Several students looked down at their desks. Few faculty members shifted uncomfortably. Professor Hartwell stood rigid, her face a mask of suppressed rage and humiliation. This is absurd, she said, her voice cracking. I will not be lectured about racism by a... She stopped herself, but the word hung unspoken in the air. Everyone knew what she was about to say. Dr. Patterson stepped forward. Elizabeth, I think you should stop talking. I made a joke, a harmless joke. He solved the equation. Fine, congratulations. But I will not be made into some villain because... You mocked him, Dr. Patterson said quietly. In front of this entire room, you mocked his intelligence, dismissed his abilities, and questioned his worth based solely on his job title and, yes, his race. We all heard it. We all saw it. Professor Hartwell looked around the room, searching for allies. She found none. The students wouldn't meet her eyes. The faculty members looked away. Even the dean was staring at her with an expression of deep disappointment. Marcus stood at the board, his solution shining behind him like vindication made visible. You promised, Marcus said quietly. You said if someone solved this equation, you'd marry them. The room held its breath. I don't want to marry you, Professor Hartwell, Marcus continued, his voice gaining power. But I do want you to acknowledge that brilliance doesn't have a color.
Intelligence doesn't come with a uniform, and genius isn't determined by who gets accepted into your universities or who you deem worthy of respect.
The fallout was immediate and seismic. Within hours, video footage from the classroom, recorded by a student for note-taking purposes, had been shared across social media. The clip showed everything: Professor Hartwell's mocking dismissal, Marcus's quiet dignity, and his breathtaking solution appearing on the board like a mathematical poem. The video went viral. Millions watched. Comments poured in from mathematicians, academics, and ordinary people who saw in Marcus's story a reflection of systemic racism that existed in every field, every institution, every level of society. Professor Elizabeth Hartwell was placed on immediate administrative leave. The university launched an investigation not just into her conduct, but into its admission practices from 17 years ago. What they found was damning. Marcus's application had been flagged and rejected by a committee member who had since retired, but whose notes revealed explicit racial bias. Marcus Thompson's entrance exam scores had been perfect. His essays were extraordinary. He should have been accepted with a full scholarship. Instead, he'd been discarded, his potential buried under someone else's prejudice. The dean personally apologized to Marcus in a public statement. "We failed Mr. Thompson 17 years ago, and we've been failing him every day since. His brilliance was in our building, contributing to our institution's success in invisible ways, and we never saw him. That ends now." Westbrook University offered Marcus a full professorship, not as charity, but as recognition of his abilities. They offered him a research position, a salary commensurate with his talents, and access to resources he'd been denied for nearly 2 decades. But the story was bigger than one university's redemption arc. Marcus's solution to the equation was published in a prestigious mathematical journal. Scholars around the world studied his innovative approach. Dr. Patterson co-authored a paper with Marcus, crediting him as the primary innovator. Academic conferences invited him to speak. Universities that never knew his name suddenly wanted to honor him. But Marcus never forgot where he came from. He accepted the professorship, but he also launched a program for invisible scholars, people working in maintenance, food service, security, and other jobs at universities who had untapped intellectual potential. He created pathways for them to audit classes, access libraries, and receive mentorship. He knew there were others like him, brilliant minds trapped in circumstances shaped by poverty, race, and systemic barriers. "I was lucky," Marcus said in his first lecture as a professor. "Lucky that I was in the room that day, lucky that I had the courage to speak up, but how many others never got that moment? How many janitors, cashiers, factory workers, and housekeepers have solved equations in their minds but never had the chance to prove it? Talent is universal. Opportunity is not." His words resonated. Universities across the country began re-examining their practices. Corporations started outreach programs. The conversation about who gets recognized, who gets seen, and who gets dismissed based on superficial judgments gained momentum. Professor Hartwell never returned to teaching. She issued a public apology that many felt was too little, too late. She claimed she wasn't racist, just overly competitive and protective of academic standards. But the video didn't lie. Her contempt had been visible, her racism undeniable. Years later, Marcus would reflect on that day with complex emotions. He'd proven himself, yes. He'd shattered assumptions and changed lives. But he also knew the victory was bittersweet. He said in an interview, "I shouldn't have had to be extraordinary to be seen as human. I shouldn't have had to solve an impossible equation to be treated with basic respect. Every person, regardless of their job, their skin color, their background, deserves dignity, not just the ones who can prove they're exceptional."
His story became a case study in psychology courses, sociology classes, and diversity training programs. It sparked debates about implicit bias, about the ways racism operates, not just through hatred, but through assumptions, dismissals, and the quiet violence of being made invisible. And in that Westbrook University classroom, where Marcus had once cleaned floors in silence, now stood a plaque with his solution engraved on it. Below the equation were the words, "Genius has no uniform. Intelligence has no color. See people."